The road to Ashen Hollow was a winding serpent, slithering through dense forests and over craggy hills. It was the kind of road that seemed to narrow as you drove, the trees leaning in as if they had secrets to share. Nathan Hart found himself gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly as he navigated the twists and turns. He'd driven across many states to reach this isolated village, but the final stretch seemed to take an eternity. Ashen Hollow wasn't on most maps. It was a forgotten place buried deep in the Appalachian Mountains. Nathan, a journalist with a penchant for the paranormal, had stumbled upon its mention in an old book of regional folklore. The village's claim to fame, or rather infamy, was the Blackwood family and their mansion, perched on a hill overlooking the village like a dark sentinel. The family's history was one of tragedy and mystery, the kind of story that made Nathan's pulse quicken with the promise of a great article. As he finally entered the village, he was struck by its desolate beauty. The buildings, though old and worn, had a certain charm. The streets were empty, save for a few stray cats and an old man sitting on a porch smoking a pipe. The villagers watched him with wary eyes as he drove by, and Nathan could feel the weight of their suspicion. He pulled up to the only inn in town, a small, two-story building with a sign that read the Ashen Inn. The innkeeper, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and graying hair, greeted him with a polite but distant demeanor.
"Evening, sir. You must be Mr. Hart,"
she said, handing him a key.
"Rooms upstairs, second door on the left."
"Thank you," Nathan replied, offering a friendly smile. "I appreciate it." She nodded, her eyes lingering on him for a moment longer.
"You're here about the Blackwood house, aren't you?"
Nathan paused, then nodded. "I am. Doing a bit of research for an article." The innkeeper's expression tightened.
"Be careful. That place, it's not right. Hasn't been for a long time."
Nathan felt a chill run down his spine, but he brushed it off. "I'll be careful, thanks for the warning." He made his way to his room, a small but cozy space with a view of the village. As he unpacked, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. It wasn't just the villagers' stares. It was something more, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. He tried to dismiss it as paranoia, but it lingered at the back of his mind like a stubborn shadow. That night, as he lay in bed, Nathan dreamed of the Blackwood Mansion. In his dream, he stood at the foot of the hill, looking up at the imposing structure. The windows were dark and the air was thick with the scent of decay. As he approached the front door, it creaked open on its own, revealing a yawning void of darkness. He hesitated, but something compelled him to step inside. The door slammed shut behind him, and the darkness swallowed him whole. Nathan woke with a start, his heart pounding. The room was cold, colder than it should have been. He glanced at the window, half expecting to see someone, or something, staring back at him. But there was nothing there, only the silent village under a blanket of fog. Shaking off the remnants of the dream, Nathan resolved to visit the Blackwood Mansion the next day. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to let fear stop him. Little did he know, his journey into Ashen Hollow's dark history was only just beginning. The morning dawned gray and misty, casting an eerie pallor over Ashen Hollow. Nathan felt a mix of excitement and trepidation as he made his way through the village, following the winding path that led up to Blackwood Mansion. The villagers watched him go, their expressions a blend of pity and dread. The path grew steeper as he climbed the hill, the trees closing in around him. The mansion loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the overcast sky. As he approached, he noticed the intricate details of the building. The gargoyles perched on the eaves, their stone faces twisted in eternal grimaces. The ivy that crept up the walls like skeletal fingers. The windows, dark and vacant, like the eyes of a long-dead corpse. The front door was massive, made of dark oak and adorned with ironwork. Nathan took a deep breath and pushed it open, the hinges groaning in protest. The air inside was stale and cold, and the scent of decay was stronger here. He stepped into the foyer, the door creaking shut behind him. The interior of the mansion was a stark contrast to its decaying exterior. The floors were made of polished marble, and the walls were lined with rich, dark wood paneling. Chandeliers hung from the high ceilings, their crystals glinting faintly in the dim light. But despite its grandeur, the mansion felt abandoned, lifeless. Nathan wandered through the rooms, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He found the library, a grand room filled with shelves upon shelves of old books. He picked one up at random, its pages yellowed with age. The title was in Latin, and as he flipped through the pages, he saw detailed drawings of arcane symbols and rituals. His pulse quickened. This was exactly the kind of thing he had hoped to find. He snapped a few photos and made notes in his journal. As he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He glanced around, but the room was empty. He continued exploring, finding a sitting room with a grand piano, its keys covered in a thick layer of dust. A dining room with a long mahogany table set for a meal that would never be eaten, and a parlor with faded portraits of the Blackwood family. The eyes of the portraits seemed to follow him as he moved, and he felt a chill run down his spine. Finally, he found his way to the second floor. The air was colder here, and the shadows seemed deeper. He walked down a long corridor lined with doors, each one closed. He hesitated, then opened the first door on his left. The room was a bedroom, the bed neatly made as if waiting for its occupant to return. A large wardrobe stood against one wall, and a vanity with a cracked mirror against another. Nathan walked over to the vanity, drawn by a sense of morbid curiosity. As he looked into the cracked mirror, he saw a flash of movement behind him. He spun around, but the room was empty. His heart raced, and he took a deep breath to steady himself. It was just his imagination, he told himself. The house was old and creepy, but it was just a house. He continued down the corridor, opening doors and peering into rooms. Most were similar to the first: bedrooms, a few studies, and a small library. But the last door at the end of the corridor was different. It was larger, more ornate, and locked. Nathan felt a surge of curiosity. He fished a set of lockpicks from his bag, a skill he had picked up during his years as a journalist, and set to work. After a few minutes of fiddling, he heard a satisfying click, and the door swung open. The room beyond was unlike any he had seen in the mansion so far. It was a large chamber, dominated by a massive four-poster bed. The walls were covered in dark, heavy tapestries, and the floor was carpeted in a deep, blood-red rug. At the far end of the room was a large fireplace, and above it, a portrait of a man who could only be Lord Cedric Blackwood. Nathan approached the portrait, studying the man's stern, regal features. There was something unsettling about his eyes, a coldness that seemed to penetrate Nathan's very soul. He turned away, feeling a sudden urge to leave the room. As he stepped back into the corridor, he heard a faint whispering. He froze, straining to hear. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, but he couldn't make out the words. They seemed to be coming from the walls themselves, surrounding him. Panic set in, and he fled down the corridor, his footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. He didn't stop until he was outside, gasping for breath in the cold, misty air. He glanced back at the mansion, its dark windows staring back at him like empty eye sockets. He made his way back to the village, the whispers still echoing in his mind. Whatever he had awakened in that mansion, he knew it wasn't going to let him go easily. Back at the Ashen Inn, Nathan tried to shake off the unease that had settled over him. He spent the evening reviewing his notes and photos, but his mind kept drifting back to the mansion. The whispers, the sense of being watched. It was all too real, too unnerving. The innkeeper, sensing his distress, brought him a cup of tea.
You look like you've seen a ghost,
She said with a small, knowing smile. Nathan managed a weak chuckle. Something like that. That place is intense. She nodded, her expression serious.
The Blackwood family was cursed, you know. They say Lord Cedric made a pact with dark forces and it doomed them all. Strange things have happened in that house ever since.
Nathan leaned forward, intrigued. What kind of things? The innkeeper's eyes darkened.
People hear voices, see shadows moving on their own. Some say they've seen apparitions, figures dressed in old-fashioned clothes, and those who stay too long, they go mad.
A shiver ran down Nathan's spine. Have you ever been inside? She shook her head.
No, and I don't plan to. That place is evil.
Nathan spent the next few days delving deeper into the history of Ashen Hollow and the Blackwood family. He visited the village's small library, combing through old records and newspapers. He learned that Lord Cedric Blackwood had been a respected nobleman, known for his wealth and influence. But in the years leading up to his disappearance, there had been rumors of strange activities at the mansion, midnight gatherings, strange lights, and unsettling sounds. The more he learned, the more Nathan felt the weight of the mansion's dark past pressing down on him. He began to have nightmares, vivid and terrifying. In his dreams, he was back in the mansion, wandering its endless corridors, pursued by shadowy figures and whispering voices. One night, he woke with a start, his heart pounding. He could hear the whispers again, faint but distinct, coming from the direction of the mansion. He knew he had to go back, to find out what was really happening in that cursed place. Nathan armed himself with a flashlight, a camera, and a small recorder. He left the inn in the dead of night, the village silent and shrouded in mist. The path up to the mansion was even more foreboding in the dark, but he pressed on, driven by a mixture of fear and determination. As he approached the mansion, he felt the same oppressive presence he had felt before. The door creaked open as if welcoming him back, and he stepped inside. The air was colder than before, and the shadows seemed to writhe and twist around him. He made his way through the mansion, the whispers growing louder with each step. He followed them, his flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. They led him to the library, the room bathed in a sickly greenish light. In the center of the room, where the oak desk had been, there was now a large circular symbol etched into the floor. It was an intricate design, filled with arcane symbols and markings. Nathan felt a chill run through him, as he realized it was a summoning circle. As he examined the circle, the whispers became a cacophony of voices, filling the room with their insistent chatter. He could make out words now, fragments of sentences, pleas for help, cries of anguish. He felt a presence behind him and turned to see a figure standing in the doorway. It was a woman, dressed in a tattered, old-fashioned gown. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were dark, hollow voids. She stared at him, her expression a mix of sadness and desperation.
"Help us,"
she whispered, her voice echoing in the room. Nathan felt a surge of fear, but also a strange sense of empathy. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice trembling.
"We are lost,"
she replied.
"trapped by the curse. You must break it."
Before he could ask how, she vanished, leaving him alone in the cold, dark room. The whispers had faded, replaced by an oppressive silence. He knew what he had to do. He had to find a way to break the curse and free the souls trapped in the mansion. Nathan spent the next day preparing. He combed through his notes and the old books he had found in the library, searching for any clues on how to break the curse. He found a reference to a ritual, a way to close the gateway that Lord Cedric had opened. It required a specific incantation, performed at the heart of the mansion at the stroke of midnight. As the hour approached, Nathan made his way back to the mansion, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. He had memorized the incantation, and he carried a small silver dagger, an artifact he had found in the mansion's basement, which he believed was key to the ritual. The mansion was even darker and colder than before, and the oppressive presence was almost unbearable. He made his way to the library, the whispers rising in a crescendo as he entered the room. The summoning circle glowed faintly, casting an eerie light. Nathan stood at the center of the circle, the dagger in one hand, and began to recite the incantation. The words felt strange on his tongue, foreign and ancient. As he spoke, the room seemed to shift and warp around him, the air growing thick and heavy. Suddenly, the shadows in the room coalesced into a dark, hulking figure. It was Lord Cedric, his eyes burning with malevolence. He stepped forward, his presence overwhelming, and Nathan felt a wave of terror wash over him.
"You cannot stop me,"
Lord Cedric hissed.
"The gateway will remain open. The darkness will consume you."
Nathan forced himself to keep speaking, the incantation growing louder and more insistent. The circle glowed brighter, and the air hummed with energy. Lord Cedric lunged at him, but Nathan raised the dagger, its blade catching the light. With a final, desperate cry, Nathan plunged the dagger into the center of the circle. There was a blinding flash of light, and the room was filled with a deafening roar. The shadows writhed and twisted, then were sucked into the circle, disappearing into the void. The light faded, and the room was silent. Nathan collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. The oppressive presence was gone, replaced by a strange sense of peace. He had done it. He had closed the gateway and broken the curse. As he lay there, exhausted and trembling, he heard a soft voice. He looked up to see the woman from before, her expression one of gratitude and relief.
Thank you.
She whispered,
We are free.
and Nathan felt a sense of closure. He had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. The souls trapped in the mansion were free and the curse was broken. Nathan returned to the village, his body and mind exhausted. The villagers greeted him with a mixture of awe and relief. They had sensed the change, felt the oppressive weight lift from the air. The curse that had haunted Ashen Hollow for centuries was finally broken. The innkeeper, her eyes filled with tears, embraced him.
Thank you.
She whispered.
You've saved us all.
Nathan spent the next few days recovering, his dreams finally free of the nightmares that had plagued him. He wrote his article, detailing the history of the Blackwood family, the curse, and his own harrowing experience. It was a story of darkness and despair, but also of courage and redemption. As he prepared to leave Ashen Hollow, he took one last look at the village. The air was crisp and clear, the sky a brilliant blue. The mansion on the hill was now just an old, abandoned building, stripped of its malevolent power. He knew he would never forget his time in Ashen Hollow, the horrors he had faced, and the souls he had helped to free. It had changed him, made him stronger, more resilient, and as he drove away, he felt a sense of peace, knowing that he had made a difference. The whispers of Ashen Hollow were finally silenced, and the village could begin to heal. But Nathan knew that there were other stories out there, other places haunted by darkness, and he was ready to face them, armed with the knowledge and courage he had gained. For the darkness was always lurking, and the battle against it was never truly over. But as long as there were those willing to fight, there was always hope.